In the warm heart of Ibadan, where the scent of fried akara in roadside stalls mingled with the morning sun and the chants of school children filled the dusty air, there lived a 15-year-old girl named Jane. She wasn't the type you'd call ordinary, not because of anything particularly remarkable, but because of the trail of disruption she left wherever she went. Jane carried the kind of presence that could silence a room, not with grace or wisdom, but with a scowl sharp enough to cut through concrete. A Yoruba girl by blood, raised in a land where respect for elders was not merely tradition but law, Jane was the opposite of what her lineage demanded. People said her story was sad, that life had hardened her young heart too soon. Her parents had died in a tragic road accident when she was just 7, and from then on she was passed like baggage until her father's sister, Aunt Bessie, took her in. But instead of softening with care, Jane built walls, tall, thick, and unscalable. Every attempt at kindness bounced off her like a poorly aimed pebble. Aunt Bessie, a woman of patience and iron will, tried every method in her book. She cooked Jane's favorite meals, enrolled her in a decent school, bought her books, clothes, even that smartphone she once begged for, but none of it seemed to matter. Jane would return home late, ignore instructions, talk back with venom in her tone, and treat rules like personal insults. Neighbors warned Aunt Bessie, "This girl go bring Wahala one day." Bessie would sigh, hold her peace, and hope that somewhere inside the angry teenager was a scared child waiting to heal. But Jane didn't want healing. She wanted control. Control over her environment, her narrative, and everyone within it. Her teachers complained about her attitude, classmates avoided her wrath, and even the local Babalawo once muttered, "This one gets stubborn spirit pass Ogun tree." Yet Jane didn't care. She wore her disobedience like a crown, proud and unyielding. "I don't need anyone," she would hiss under her breath, "especially not people who think they know what's best for me." And so the stage was set for a fall so humbling it would rewrite everything she thought she knew. Every morning in Oluyole Estate, the community stirred to life with a rhythm Jane seemed determined to disrupt. While other children greeted elders with bent knees or bowed heads, Jane strutted past like she owned the earth beneath her feet. "Jane, can't you greet?" Mama Areti once called after her, expecting the traditional Yoruba greeting. Jane, barely glancing over her shoulder, snapped, "Auntie, you know I'm late for school," and walked on. The woman gasped, hand clutching her chest as if Jane had flung a rock at her instead of words. Stories like this were common. In church, she chewed gum during sermons. At the market, she haggled like a Lagos tout, cursing under her breath if she didn't get her way. And at home, she was a storm with no warning, slamming doors, ignoring chores, raising her voice at her aunt, and treating Aunt Bessie's sacrifices like mere expectations. Aunt Bessie bore it all with the quiet resilience only a true Yoruba matriarch could muster. She didn't retaliate with the cane, though many advised it. "Spare the rod, spoil the child," they warned. But Aunt Bessie believed Jane didn't need fear. She needed understanding. Sometimes at night, she'd sit outside Jane's door, whispering prayers to the heavens, asking the ancestors to intervene where she couldn't reach. Meanwhile, Jane remained deaf to love and blind to consequence. She saw compassion as weakness, authority as oppression, and structure as a cage. At school, teachers dreaded her smirk, the one she flashed whenever caught passing notes, mocking lessons, or skipping assignments. "Miss Jane, see me after class," Mr. Akin once said. She chuckled. "You sure it's not because you enjoy my company?" Her classmates giggled nervously, knowing better than to laugh too loud. Worse yet, Jane had a gift for manipulation. She'd twist stories to make herself the victim, blame others for her wrongs, and somehow charm her way out of punishments. Even the headmistress once fell for her act, scolding another girl after Jane accused her of bullying, when in truth, the poor girl had only asked for her book back. Jane had grown too comfortable in this identity she crafted, the untouchable, unbothered queen of her own world. But deep inside, beneath the layers of arrogance and pride, there were cracks, tiny fractures she dared not acknowledge. A part of her yearned to be seen, to be heard, to be loved, yet she had built such thick armor that even love bounced off like a pebble against iron. It was on a blazing Thursday afternoon, the sun sitting high and smug over Ibadan, when Jane's moment of reckoning began to unfold, though she couldn't have known it then. As she lingered near the school gate, casually scrolling through her phone with zero intent to attend the last two periods, she overheard a group of older students whispering animatedly. The word "party" was repeated with electric excitement, and instantly Jane's ears perked up. She had a reputation to uphold. After all, missing a trending event would be social suicide in her world. One of the boys, tall and lanky with a dyed blonde patch in his hair, leaned in closer to the others and said, "It's a private beach party for my cousin. No adults, just us. There will be a lot of drinks." Jane's lips curled into a grin. "Oh, so you did not want to invite me? Or is this a boys-only something?" Her tone was playful, yet edged with her signature entitlement. The group shifted awkwardly. One of the girls muttered, "We just didn't think you'd be interested." Jane laughed, tossing her braids over her shoulder. "Anything fun, I'm there." She tapped her phone. "Just send the location." Later that evening, as the shadows lengthened, Aunt Bessie returned from the tailoring shop, where she worked long hours. Jane brought up the party, only half-heartedly, and only to check a box. "There's a small get-together my classmates are having tomorrow," she said, eyes fixed on the TV. "Just chill music and games." Aunt Bessie didn't even hesitate. "No," she said flatly. "You're not going anywhere until your behavior changes. You don't even help in this house? Now you want to be going to parties?" Jane's jaw tightened. "So just because I'm not your real daughter, I can't live my life?" The words hit Bessie like a slap, but she simply sighed. "You're my daughter in every way that matters, but until you learn respect, you'll stay home." Jane stormed to her room, slamming the door so hard a picture fell from the wall. She stared at herself in the cracked mirror, chest heaving. The decision had already been made. Rules or no rules, she was going to that party. What could possibly go wrong? The next day came cloaked in the false promise of excitement. Jane pretended to be her usual sullen self through breakfast, grunting responses at Aunt Bessie and dragging her feet as if heading to school was a burden too heavy to bear. But the moment the gate clanged behind her, her demeanor changed like a scene switch in a film. She pulled out a small bag, full of money she stole from Aunt Bessie, from the corner behind the flower pots, one she had secretly packed the night before with her best clothes, lip gloss, and some cash she had been saving. Quickly, she ducked behind a kiosk, changed from her school uniform into a figure-hugging dress and a pair of flat sandals, and then flagged down an Okada rider. "Ogbo Beach. I'll pay you extra if you don't ask questions," she said, slipping on her oversized sunglasses like a celebrity dodging paparazzi. The man shrugged. "That's your problem," he said, revving his bike as they sped off. The road was rough, winding through dusty bush paths and past distant farmland. Jane's excitement surged with every bump. She imagined the music, the flashing lights, the admiring glances, and the envy in other girls' eyes when she arrived. In her mind, she was a queen about to make her royal entrance. When they finally pulled up near a clearing that led to the private beach, she saw clusters of teens, some older, already dancing and lounging around with red plastic cups in hand. Music blared from portable speakers, and the scent of grilled meat mixed with something stronger, alcohol, thick and sharp in the air. She strutted in with confidence, greeting no one in particular, but expecting everyone to notice. A few guys nodded, some girls gave her the up-and-down glance, and within minutes she had positioned herself near the bonfire like a star ready for her spotlight. "Jane, you made it!" a guy called out. She smiled smugly. "Of course. I don't miss events. You know me." The music turned louder. Someone passed her a drink. "Try small," they said. She hesitated, then downed it like a pro, even though the bitterness made her throat burn. She danced, she laughed, and she mocked anyone who seemed too shy to join in. She was in her element, or so she thought. But as the sky turned indigo and the crowd grew rowdier, a chill began to creep down her spine. Something didn't feel right. At first, Jane ignored the unease. Maybe it was just the unfamiliar drink in her stomach, or the way some of the boys laughed too loudly, their eyes lingering a little too long. The music had shifted too. What was once cheerful now sounded heavier, more chaotic. People danced, yes, but now it looked more like flailing. Someone shoved someone else near the bonfire, and a cup spilled onto the sand. Jane took a few steps back, suddenly aware of how many unfamiliar faces surrounded her. She recognized no one she trusted. The group that had initially invited her was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Fola?" she asked a girl leaning against a rock, but the girl just shrugged and tossed her braids. "He's gone." That's when Jane's phone buzzed. It was Aunt Bessie. She ignored it. The second buzz was followed by another, and then the battery died. "Perfect," Jane muttered, pocketing the phone. She didn't want to admit it yet, but panic was starting to build. She scanned the crowd for a friendly face, any face, but found only strangers. Many were intoxicated. A small group of boys were arguing now, voices raised, one of them holding a bottle like a weapon. People began backing away, but no one left. Fights were part of the thrill, right? Still, Jane took cautious steps away from the bonfire. Then someone bumped into her, hard, and she fell to the ground. Sand filled her mouth. Her bag flew from her shoulder. By the time she scrambled to her feet, it was gone. "No, no, no," she whispered, spinning in circles. Her heart pounded like it wanted to escape her chest. Her money was in that bag, her ID, her charger, her house key. She stumbled through the crowd, calling out to anyone who would listen. "Please, has anyone seen a brown shoulder bag?" She sounded like a child now, pleading, her confidence crumbling with each passing second. Laughter and music drowned her voice. A boy she didn't know grabbed her wrist and grinned with glassy eyes. "Where are you going, fine girl?" he slurred. Jane snatched her hand back and ran. She didn't stop until she was out of breath, somewhere in the bush beyond the firelight. There, in the thick silence, with insects humming and shadows dancing around her, she realized she was completely, terrifyingly alone. Jane's chest heaved with exhaustion and fear. The trees around her rustled ominously, their branches like twisted arms reaching out in the dark. The sound of the party had faded, replaced by the unsettling silence of the wild. Crickets chirped. A frog croaked nearby, and something rustled in the underbrush. For the first time in years, Jane felt truly powerless. She looked down at her dusty feet, her once stylish dress now snagged at the hem, her palms scratched from the fall. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had come to the party to be admired, to prove her independence, to shine like the star she believed she was. But now she was dirty, alone, lost, and painfully sober. She bit her lip, trying to stop the tears threatening to fall. "Stop it," she muttered to herself. "You're not a baby." But her voice trembled. She took a step forward, then another, trying to trace her way back to the road, but nothing looked familiar. Trees stretched endlessly in every direction. She hadn't realized how far she had run in her panic. Her thoughts spiraled. What if someone dangerous finds me? What if I step on a snake? What if I never find my way out? For someone who always claimed to be fearless, Jane had never felt more afraid. Minutes dragged into hours. The moon climbed higher, casting silver shadows on the ground. Her stomach growled, her lips were dry, and her feet ached. She tried shouting, calling out for help, but only her echo answered. Eventually, she collapsed near a tree, curled into herself, and cried silently. Her arrogance had vanished, washed away by fear and regret. She thought of Aunt Bessie, how she must be worried sick, how she had warned her gently, lovingly. Jane remembered the warmth of their home, the aroma of a goosey soup, the sound of gospel music on Saturday mornings when Bessie cleaned. She had taken it all for granted. Now all she wanted was to be safe again, to be held, scolded even, but by someone who cared. Just as her sobs quieted into hiccups, she heard the rumble of a distant motor. Her head jerked up. Lights! A small motorcycle's headlamp pierced the darkness, weaving its way along a dirt path. Jane scrambled up, waving frantically. "Help, please!" The bike slowed. The rider, a middle-aged man in a faded agbada with a farming hoe tied to his back, looked stunned. "The naughty girl, what are you doing here?" The man's eyes narrowed in concern as he dismounted his motorcycle, steadying the bike with a practiced ease. Jane stumbled toward him, limbs trembling, eyes wide with desperation. "Please, sir," she gasped. "I got lost. I don't know where I am." The man frowned deeply, studying her disheveled appearance. "This bush path no be for children, oh. Especially not at night," he said, voice thick with rural Yoruba accent. "Where are your people?" Jane opened her mouth to explain, but all that came out was a weak, broken sob. The man sighed heavily and gestured toward the bike. "Climb," he said. Jane didn't argue. She climbed onto the motorcycle, holding on to the man with the kind of humility she'd never shown anyone before. The bike jerked forward, speeding through uneven paths, kicking up dust and leaves. Jane clung tightly, every bump reminding her of the gravity of her decisions. As the wind rushed past her ears, her mind raced through everything that had led to this moment. Her pride, her rebellion, the party, the bag she had lost, the fear in the bush. For the first time, she wasn't trying to defend herself in her head. She wasn't spinning lies or rehearsing comebacks. She was just quiet, honest, regretful. They eventually emerged near a narrow road where a few lanterns flickered from distant homes. The man parked by a roadside shed pulled out an old Nokia phone from his agbada and offered it to her to call her relatives. Jane took the phone with shaking hands. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment. Then slowly she dialed Aunt Bessie's number. It rang only once before Bessie answered, her voice frantic. "Jane?" Jane couldn't hold it back. Her lips trembled. "Auntie, I'm sorry," she whispered, tears finally spilling freely. "I messed up. Please, I'm so sorry." There was silence on the other end, then a choked sound. "Where are you? Tell me, I'm coming." By the time Aunt Bessie arrived in a keke marwa tricycle, eyes wide with worry and scarf half tied, Jane ran into her arms without hesitation. No pride, no resistance, just a sobbing teenager clinging to the only person who had never given up on her. And for the first time, Bessie held her not in frustration, but in quiet relief. "Thank God," she murmured. "You're safe. That's all that matters." And just like that, Jane's walls began to crack. The ride back to Aunt Bessie's house was quiet, except for the occasional sniffling Jane couldn't hide. Her thoughts were jumbled, a mess of guilt, shame, and an unfamiliar weight on her chest. She hadn't known she could feel this small, this vulnerable. When they arrived at the house, Aunt Bessie didn't say much. She simply helped Jane inside, settled her on the couch, and handed her a warm towel to wipe her face. As Jane sat there, huddled under the dim light of the living room, the reality of what had happened started to sink in. The party, the strangers, the lost bag of money, it all felt like another life, another Jane. That was a version of her she barely recognized. "Auntie," Jane whispered, breaking the silence between them. Aunt Bessie, who had been standing by the door, turned slowly, waiting. Jane looked down at her hands, fingers twisting nervously in her lap. I thought I could handle everything. I thought I could do whatever I wanted without consequences." Her voice cracked. "But I was wrong. I was so wrong." The weight of her actions pressed down on her, the full scope of her rebellion finally hitting her. "I've been terrible to you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've hurt you. You've done everything for me, and all I've done is make you worry. I'm sorry." Aunt Bessie didn't respond immediately, and for a moment Jane feared her aunt would stay silent, cold, perhaps even angry. But then Bessie moved toward her, kneeling in front of her. She cupped Jane's face in her hands, wiping away the fresh tears with the back of her thumb. "You are my child, Jane. I don't care what has happened. What matters is that you've realized this mistake, and that is the beginning of change," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I have forgiven you, and I always will, because you are my blood. I am not giving up on you." The sincerity in Bessie's words shattered whatever defense Jane had left. She buried her face in her aunt's shoulder and let the tears flow freely. They weren't just tears of regret. They were the tears of someone finally acknowledging the truth of someone who had spent years running from love, only to realize that love was the very thing that could heal her. Jane didn't have the words to explain how much she felt in that moment. She didn't need to. The silence between them now spoke volumes. The days that followed were filled with a new sense of quiet. Aunt Bessie didn't lecture her. There were no harsh words or punishments, only small, consistent gestures that spoke louder than anything Jane had ever heard. Every morning, Aunt Bessie would ask her to help with chores around the house, something she'd refused to do before. At first, Jane resented it, dragging her feet with every task. She wanted to go back to her old way of life, where she could shut herself off from others, where she could hold on to her pride and pretend she didn't need anyone. But over time, as she washed dishes, swept floors, and tended to the garden, something inside her began to shift. Each simple act of service, each moment of shared responsibility felt like an act of healing. For the first time in years, Jane was paying attention to the details of life around her, noticing things she had taken for granted. One afternoon, as she sorted through a pile of clothes in the small room they called their living room, Jane saw a picture frame she had never noticed before. It was of her parents, her mother, smiling warmly in the sun, and her father, holding her as a baby in his arms. She had seen the picture before, of course, but never with this clarity. She had always thought of her parents' deaths as a distant event, something that happened long ago to a girl who wasn't old enough to understand. But now, with the weight of her recent experiences bearing down on her, the loss felt different. It felt real. Her parents had been full of life, full of hope for her, and now they were gone. Aunt Bessie, who had taken her in as her own, had become the only mother she had left. Jane's stomach twisted as she thought of the reckless, selfish way she had been treating the woman who had given her a home, a future, and a second chance. Slowly, as if the thought had just clicked into place, Jane understood something deeper than she ever had before. Love was not just given to be taken, it had to be earned. For years, she had been demanding love without offering any in return, and now she saw how much harm that had caused. That night, after they finished dinner, Jane sat down beside Aunt Bessie, her heart thudding in her chest. "Auntie," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I want to help more. I want to be better for you. For me, too." Aunt Bessie turned to her, the faintest hint of a smile curling at the corners of her lips. "You are already better, my dear, just by recognizing the need for change." Jane nodded, her heart swelling with the first taste of something she hadn't had in a long time: hope. Over the following weeks, Jane's life began to take on a rhythm she had never known before. Each day she worked alongside Aunt Bessie, her hands learning the familiar tasks that had once seemed so beneath her. She woke up earlier, made the bed without being asked, and even cooked dinner a few times. At first, Aunt Bessie would watch with quiet amusement, offering helpful tips, but Jane soon found a rhythm of her own. There was something deeply satisfying in the simplicity of these acts. Stirring soup, sweeping the yard, folding laundry, small tasks that, in their repetition, helped her slow down and think about her life, about the choices she had made, and the consequences of her arrogance. The change wasn't just in her actions. Her interactions with others began to shift as well. Jane noticed that her classmates, who had once whispered behind her back, started to engage with her differently. They no longer saw her as the arrogant girl who would never listen. One day, as they gathered for break, one of the quieter girls, Ada, approached Jane with a hesitant smile. "Jane," she said, "I heard about what happened that night. I'm glad you're okay." Jane looked at her for a moment, surprised by the genuine warmth in her voice. "Thank you," Jane said softly, feeling a small but significant shift within herself. "I'm sorry about how I acted before." Ada nodded, her expression understanding, and they began talking like old friends. At home, Aunt Bessie didn't need to say much. Her pride in Jane's progress was evident in the way she allowed Jane to take on more responsibility without saying a word. One evening, as they sat together over dinner, Aunt Bessie reached out and took Jane's hand. "You're learning, my child," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It is not the mistakes we make that define us. It is the courage to rise again, to do better, that matters." Jane squeezed her aunt's hand, feeling the weight of those words in a way she never had before. But perhaps the most significant change came when Jane received an unexpected invitation from her school. The annual academic award ceremony was coming up, and they wanted to honor her for her dramatic improvement in her behavior and grades. Jane had never been one to seek attention, but this felt different. It wasn't a reward for being perfect. It was a recognition of her efforts to grow, to become better. As she stood before the school assembly accepting the certificate with a humble smile, Jane realized something profound. For the first time, she was proud of herself, not because she had won anything, but because she had finally learned the value of humility, of understanding the love and respect that came with it. Her heart felt light, and for the first time in years, the burden of her arrogance lifted completely. The weeks that followed felt like a fresh beginning for Jane. The changes in her weren't just visible to others, they were visible to herself. She began to understand that the true meaning of growth was not just in the surface-level achievements, like good grades or social recognition, but in the deeper transformation that took place within her heart. The transformation in Jane didn't happen overnight, and she knew it. Every day brought its challenges, each a reminder that growth was a continuous process, not a final destination. Yet, for the first time in her life, Jane felt ready to face the future with a clear heart. Her relationships at school with Aunt Bessie and even with herself had all been reshaped by the lessons of her mistakes. She no longer needed to assert her independence through arrogance or rebellion. She understood now that true strength came from the quiet courage of doing what was right, not what was easy. As she stood at the edge of the school compound one afternoon, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jane felt a new sense of hope stir in her chest. She had once thought she had all the answers, but now she realized that life wasn't about knowing everything. It was about embracing the journey, with all its lessons, twists, and turns. She wasn't perfect. She still had moments of doubt, moments when the old, defiant Jane whispered in the back of her mind, tempting her to slip back into her former ways. But she also knew she had grown enough to recognize those moments and choose a different path. Her classmates, who had once seen her as untouchable, now respected her in a way she never thought possible. Ada, who had become her close friend, often said, "You've changed, Jane. I can tell. You're different, in a good way." Jane would smile at her and nod. She didn't need to say much. Her actions spoke louder than words ever could. As Aunt Bessie continued to guide her, Jane took on more responsibility at home, helping to run errands and even contributing to the family's income by tutoring younger children in the neighborhood. She found a deep sense of satisfaction in these small, daily acts of service, something she had once viewed as beneath her. With each tutoring session, each chore, she was beginning to understand the value of hard work and humility, qualities that had once felt foreign to her. Jane finally understood. The greatest gift Aunt Bessie had given her wasn't just the second chance to start over. It was the belief that she could rise above her mistakes, learn from them, and build a life filled with meaning and purpose. Jane had learned the hard way. Yes, but she had learned. And now she was ready for whatever came next. Years passed, and Jane's transformation blossomed into something extraordinary. Her dedication to her studies earned her the position of best student throughout senior secondary school. Her teachers, once exasperated by her behavior, now praised her for her brilliance, humility, and discipline. She earned a full scholarship to one of Nigeria's top universities to study medicine, her dream inspired by a desire to help others as she had once been helped. Jane graduated with first-class honors, receiving accolades nationwide for her groundbreaking research in community health. She later completed her residency abroad and returned to Nigeria, where she built a medical outreach center in her hometown, offering free health care to the poor and underserved. As her reputation grew, so did her impact. Jane opened a free clinic in her hometown. She treated the sick, provided medical aid, and mentored the disadvantaged youth across the country. She helped pregnant mothers, gave hope to the forgotten. Her philanthropic work earned her national and international recognition. She founded a foundation for orphans and poor students, just like she once was. She remembered the pain and chose to be the solution. She became a national icon, loved not for her fame, but for her heart. She proved that even the most broken people can heal and help others heal. Jane eventually married a kind-hearted engineer who shared her passion for service. Together, they built a home filled with love and purpose. The same town that once whispered about her defiance now celebrated her transformation. "See what discipline and love can do," the elders would say. Jane had not only learned the hard way, she had conquered it. Thank you for watching this powerful story. If you found Jane's story moving, touching, or even familiar, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more heartfelt tales like this one. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder. Healing begins the moment we stop running, and no one is too far gone to be saved.